Can you offer any insight on the state's strategy if drought conditions remain?
You know, what we're going to continue to make sure as part of our strategy, and you heard me talk about our response to communities, and in not just the San Joaquin Valley, but up and down the state, that, you know, we're running out of water this last summer. You know, that is, you know, certainly a priority amongst them and a tool. But, let's look at the Russian River watershed, because I think there, you know, you don't have the delta, you don't have project decisions. It can be easier to say, okay, what is the state's response, and where does it fit amongst conservation? There, you know, we relaxed water quality standards at the board. We adopted temporary urgency change petitions. We also then enacted curtailments. All of it was to keep water up in the reservoir and to be able to allow cities to continue to draw. And then conservation was an incredible and important component of the community's response to be able to respond to drought. But here, important that, you know, as we talk about what is really a continuum, you know, I was just talking about the long-term standards around conservation and where we're going, and here, important to distinct that we're talking about what we respond to in these drought conditions, which are here, these last 2 months, the dryness has been incredibly troubling. This climate whiplash that we're experiencing is making it so that our decision making has to be really rooted in what are the conditions we're finding and how are we best responding. And so, as we saw in the last drought, a statewide conservation target was really important to really drive that change statewide, given the magnitude of the challenges that, you know, communities were seeing. And if you think about that work now, that 17% savings is creating resiliency in the moment we're in now. So I have nothing to broadcast about what the governor's decision is ultimately around that. What I do want to emphasize is that conservation is incredibly critical to all of our response, not just in the immediate, which, you know, we've provided and continue to want to and have, that, you know, the local ability to assess and say, are we there? Should we be really concerned and broadcasting to our communities that this is a moment where they really need to be pulling and conserving? And again, I think that that has to be balanced amongst all the decision making around drought. And, you know, I don't want to de-emphasize or emphasize it in that, but just make sure that we're not in this. I mean, this is now the, I think, third or fourth question I got about conservation in a row. So it's obviously a topic. It's front of mind for you all, and I can sense the anxiety around it, truly, because I know that it impacts rates. I know that it can really, you know, ultimately hurt the steady projections that, you know, folks can have on some of their rates, their assessments. And so, you know, I don't want to, as I emphasize the importance of conservation, give short shrift to what I know, and reflective of, again, the questions, the real concern around conservation and where we go. But critically, you look at the aridity, you look at the fact that we haven't been this dry in 1,200 years, and at some point, you know, I think that we should just maybe rest on that it is an important thing we do, and that this, you know, the over concern around it can actually send, you know, wrong messages.
I took that next card that had that word in it, and I moved it. This one doesn't have
it's a different angle.
This one doesn't have conservation in it. This one says, should the state consider conducting an economic study of the impact of the state-mandated standards? The plan could be significantly adjusted or thrown out if the cost impacts are realized. In addition to being citizen statesmen, some of our directors, I won't mention Jeff Thomas or Mark Monin, have finance backgrounds. So would that be something that the state would consider?
Yes, we will be considering cost as we do, not just with, you know, as we set conservation or efficiency targets, but maximum contaminant limits, which, you know, incredibly have impacts around cost. And hopefully there's a PFAS question in there, because it's a huge issue in your area, and it is incredibly costly, the response that so many here in the region are having to you know, engender here. And I would like to say that what we fortunately have is just a generational moment. When you look at the infrastructure dollars from the federal government, going back to that 50-year lens, and those dollars that accomplished this work that we take something sometimes for granted in our communities, we're back at a moment where we're seeing similar levels. And I think that we have to be really mindful of, how are we driving, ourselves to invest in the projects that really continue to build the resiliency that we need in our communities and address these issues like drought, and excited for the opportunities to do that around not just PFAS, emerging contaminants, but what are these 21st century water systems we're really building? And water recycling, its growth is, I don't have to tell any of you here where the region has been such an incredible leader, but now seeing the real race amongst leaders, political leaders, to embrace and build the support and have the resources to accomplish this work has been incredible to see.
I can give you the answer to the next question. What they really want to hear is, don't worry, the bank is open. The question is, when you consider cost impacts to the ratepayer, when you consider the impacts of addressing PFAS,
Oh, thank you.
doesn't that indicate a challenge to the long-stated goal of making drinking water more affordable?
Yeah, that's where the funding, I think of that 9.75 billion from 2014, and not all of it is, a majority, I'll have to, actually I should have at the top of my head the breakdown between loans and grants amongst that, but it's probably safe to say it's a little more majority loan, but at 1%, which of course, that savings across, the life of the projects is, depending, especially on these larger water recycling projects, tens and tens of millions. And so, but the funding is going to help, again, with what we know are real affordability challenges. And it's why, again, I think we're really fortunate for the bipartisan infrastructure law, but importantly as well, the leadership of the governor and the legislature, where the board received $1.3 billion this last summer, which, for those of you that have tracked, the Safe and Affordable Fund, access to clean drinking water, the huge challenge that it was to really, after years and years of discussion, get a fund for, $1.3 billion over 10 years, to receive that, here then in a tranche in a single year, I think demonstrates, kind of how things have shifted, how the discussion has really shifted about the importance of water and the importance of investing in our systems. And so, you look at that and for as we consider emerging contaminants at the board, what the impacts of conservation are doing for folks, and ultimately, for me, it's a systems approach. It's understanding and my humility and understanding that the work that gets done at the local level amongst nearly 7,000 water systems across the state. And 400 majority serve nearly 90+%, 95% of the population. But we still have a lot of systems with a lot of people out there that we need to start thinking differently about how we invest in them, how they come together, how we all and again, examples throughout the region here through SAPA and other great organizations where the investments have really been pooled in ways that really help affordability, because everyone's not just one-off out there. So I think for me it's really how do we best support those local systems, and consolidation and regionalization is an important part, because that's what creates the base, the ratepayer base, and the economies of scale to do the work that's done here in this room by many of you as incredible leaders.
So the door to the bank's kind of open.
Yeah, there's bags of money under the chair or something. I don't know. No, there's not. I would never. I don't carry cash.
You noticed I shuffled a couple of cards at the bottom. They were.
Yeah, they may have been. Well,
but I've got a new one here.
I appreciate that. Again, that there is a real concern, and here, and is why what I appreciate most is actually what are things that folks are wanting to hear most, is I need to take that back. There's obviously a lot more explanation and work that we need to do around what's happening around conservation, how it is harming and benefiting and or otherwise part of what is not a single approach, but is truly a portfolio approach when we talk about the investments and the other priorities that not just the board, but the administration is pursuing.
You know, you're really good at this. And this came not from me, not from the staff that has been obviously concerned because Joe Berg's been talking to us about conservation, and because we have a deep and abiding love of that. But as a dinner registrant, someone said, would you agree that increased storage, both surface and groundwater, of surplus water during wet winters is the most cost-effective, significant improvement to water supply for fish and the environment, farming, and urban use? We want to make these as long as possible so you can't remember all the facets.
No, I think I capture. I think I get what that person's putting down, and I will say that yes, storage is incredibly important. Again, that reservoir that I mentioned from Santa Margarita watershed, you know, we need to store. And I think that what can all and yes, prioritize below ground, capture, you know, what are right now nuisance water basically. I mean, you think of the, you know, municipal sewer stormwater permit, the MS4 permits that we issue. And there's great tension, right, around how do we implement them. It's very costly, but let's, you know, if that stormwater is better seen as that resource and not just that liability, which, you know, I think of a lot of, you know, issues that we often face, needing that sort of better pivot. I think we can better accomplish more things. So yes, definitely to storage. The board has prioritized underground or groundwater recharge by having a streamlined permit in our water rights process, actually, to encourage landowners and water right holders to come in. It's a reduced fee. It's not as complicated as some of the other engagements that you can have with us on the water rights side, where, you know, it's not going to take years to approve or agree to the project. You know, we can really, you know, because of some upfront work we did, you know, better process those. So, you know, our lights on, you know, we've been working with DWR as well and appreciate all their floodmar work to really connect the landscape in that way, where we're better taking care of our watersheds by being smarter about the way we draw from them, which is obvious in these times of drought when there's not enough there. We really have to wean ourselves back from that. And that's where, again, where water recycling comes in, where storage comes in to get you past those times. And it is above and below, and it's the interconnectivity of those systems. You know, it's incredible, the complexity, the amount of science and technical work that goes on just hums away on a daily basis in all of our watersheds to assure that, you know, I can sit here at this dinner, we all can collectively and have the water that we have. And, you know, it's, so yeah, the storage is definitely part of that, and we need to continue to, and then there's the Prop 1 storage dollars, and then, you know, I think that's what everyone thinks of when they automatically talk about storage in the state. They, you know, they go to, you know, Prop 1 and, you know, the storage projects there, which, you know, you look across the landscape and we have an incredible amount of huge storage projects, and the problem is that, you know, it's really hard to cite and understand how are we going to operate any larger ones given the challenges we have with the current ones. And I think that sometimes comes up, some of the discussion.
Would you agree that if we could find out able to do direct potable reuse, that would make getting reclaimed water facilities under construction more readily?
Yeah. Yeah, what we are fortunate to have had as a priority, actually, in that $1.3 billion that the board received this last summer was, you know, 650 of it was split half and half, drinking water and wastewater. The wastewater side actually has a priority for septic to sewer projects. Again, I don't mean to lean too heavily, but you look at this 50-year history of the Clean Water Act and how, you know, incredibly successful, you know, it kind of is, and sometimes easy to take for granted. But there are huge inequities still that exist in our state, in our nation. And so, as I kind of cheerlead for and make sure we give voice to that incredible work of so many in the sector, important to note that there are huge gaps, and especially around sanitation, which even more so, I think we easily all take incredibly for granted. But there are many communities still on septic. They create issues with groundwater quality, and ultimately, being able to build out that infrastructure builds in the pipeline and the supplies for further water recycling. And while it's important and incredible to see the leadership of Los Angeles and San Diego and San Francisco and Monterey and all the large projects that are coming online, there's other communities like Modesto and Turlock who also have water recycling that go to agriculture that we need to see more of. That we need to expand, recycling not just to, larger, importantly, and able to service many communities, but these harder to hit communities sometimes that get left behind. And I think, and sometimes these funding sprees that, again, I'm fortunate to have spent time. I think of the ARA funding, the Recovery Act, and its implementation, and it's like, how do we do lessons learned and make sure that as we implement and have this opportunity with this tranche of funding, that we make sure that we bridge those inequities that are part of the legacy that we have around these 50-year programs.
Okay.
You have to hold me to the, I don't want to be left up here and anyone feel I didn't answer any questions.
Okay. In witness to your Coachella Valley heritage, from a dinner registrant, what are the realistic solutions to the Salton Sea? After you finish that, we're sending you to Palestine.
So I as a child, when I grew up out in there, recreated at the sea often. My uncle would take us down, and not having and knowing it's not just not a place where the community is able to recreate, but that it's a health hazard at this point as well. It is not something that, and interestingly, I had, when I was an intern in Senator Boxer's office, and when I started out there in like 2007, it was like the first memo I had written, and it was only because, one of the staff had passed down, there's a meeting with Audubon, and they're coming in on the sea, and we know you're from the Valley. Why don't you sit in and help? And so as it was an intern memo, but it was for me a little affirming. And so when it comes to the solutions at the sea, I think the point that I made earlier around stormwater, around liabilities versus assets, I think is similar with the sea. I think that for so long the state and the feds have kind of treated it as a liability that it's kind of who's going to figure it out. And I think that, and I certainly wasn't around in 2003, but the decision making that went on then to say, well, let's just buy ourselves 15 years and we'll figure it out around something so truly landscape level and monumental as the sea, and what would need to be done to be able to address it. It didn't help because I think that allowed some parties to kind of get what they needed from things, but leave still out there the question of what you do at the sea. So all that to say, I think that what we have, thankfully, is an administration that has really prioritized the community and the sea, and the Lithium Valley Commission right now that is, exploring how you see the region as an asset. Mm-hmm. But I think that, we have to be importantly make sure those discussions, and I'm glad to see that there is a commission and that the discussion is being taken seriously, and that the governor and the president have personal interest down at the sea, and early on the governor was down at the sea and committed to help find solutions. The development of these economic streams that you create opportunity, create, hopefully solutions as well for again, something that for so long has been seen as a liability and is now, I think, shifting into an asset, has been great to see. And I think that, what I can only hope it does is give, even further weight to the restoration work that's going, to the importance of the sea in context of the Colorado River, where we know that we continue to have great strains there, and that our obligations down at the sea, and important for all of us to see a success there, is such that it otherwise puts incredible pressure on the deals between IID and San Diego, and that entire space. So I think that we continue to need to see the investments down at the projects at the sea, innovate, see the places, the important laboratory that I think it is, where you have this combination of agriculture and energy production, and
solar, lithium.
And the lithium from, yes, exactly.
And if only we knew someone that lived in an area near there, like Rancho Mirage, that maybe it had experience in government at levels like the United States Senate, that had a relationship with someone in the water world, that maybe that could help move mountains and magic.
You never know. You never know.
For those of you who had forgotten, our guest worked with Barbara Boxer for a number of years. And for those of you who missed it on the bestseller list, she wrote a book, a novel.
She did.
And I couldn't help but wonder if you had to proofread or helped anywhere along there.
No, and it was incredible the amount of energy Senator Boxer has, and to have been able to spend time with her there, because, amongst the incredible decision making that she had to be under and the leadership that she was able to demonstrate, she was also writing books. Who, as an English major, as you heard from UC Santa Barbara, a fan of literature, I think the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell each other, are really important, because it says a lot about us and who we are.
I think that the rest of my questions have either been covered or cover conservation. As a result of that, we have a brain trust here that could ask a couple of questions if you'd allow that.
Oh, please, yes.
Because,
if I said anything that pissed you off, or otherwise you disagreed with, please, I would actually really appreciate it, especially around conservation, because we talked a bit about it. So
if this goes well, I did it. If it doesn't, it was Damon Nicolizzi, the guy in the back of the room over there.
If it goes off the hinges, I'm just not pressed.
Do we have microphones, Damon, or are they out and about? There's microphones up. Who wants to be the first adventuress?
Thanks for being here and for spending time with us. You mentioned conservation many times, and throughout the state, it seemed to be used as kind of a magic bullet. But in fact, as we all know, 10% of the water in California is used residentially. The other 90% is ecological orientation or agriculture. So how is additional conservation really going to address the issue when it's such a small part of the whole?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I want to make clear it's not a silver bullet, and if I my response around conservation, my defense of it, somehow again belied the nearly $10 billion investment in other ways that I hope I try to articulate, isn't the one the one thing that is going to solve everything. I apologize about that. I think that when there was another point I was going to make, but since your question was about conservation, it threw me off a moment. I think that it isn't everything that we're pursuing. It's not the only strategy that we have, and I think that you look at its importance, especially given that the conservation that we still have from the last drought, is resilience here in the face of the dry conditions that we have now. Anyway, I guess I disagree. That's the only thing.
Did you do such a crackerjack job and everybody got bashful? If that's the case, I can arrange for this gentleman right over here. Is that Chris?
Yes.
Oh, it's Chris Palmer. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call on you.
Cut the event off now. I'm Chris Palmer with the California Special Districts Association. We have over 1,300 members statewide. About a third of them are water districts. I've been meeting with a few water districts in the last couple months. Workforce development seems to be a problem and an issue when it comes to certification and testing for water system operators, sanitation work operators, and wondering how we can get that process sped up.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chris.
thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate that good question. And there was a second part to what I wanted to respond to your question, and I want to make sure and get to it, and then I'll get to wastewater drinking water certifications. So when we look at water use in the state, there's different ways of parsing out, right? All of, at least what we develop doesn't necessarily go to the environment, which can be seen as about 15%. And it's hard to say on average years, but 50%. Say, and then 40%, and then 10% to your part on urban. Ag is being curtailed. We curtailed this last summer. Those have huge impacts in agriculture. Agriculture isn't somehow being left alone. And again, what isn't a single lens on conservation, but is really about how are we responding to drought comprehensively, supporting communities through drought, importantly, that go dry, but then also enacting curtailments, relaxing water quality standards to hold more water back in reservoirs, and yes, emphasizing and encouraging conservation, because again, you look at the Russian River watershed, and without this extreme conservation that went on there, they wouldn't have survived through the summer. And so those are examples of communities really embracing this, not taking it as, again, or overblowing the tension around it, but I appreciate it. Again, it's come up so many times tonight. It's obvious that there's a direct, real seems tension and conflict around it. But I don't want that perception from folks that it's a single approach to be what's really out there, because again, ag took a real hit, especially from the projects who, again, I think Reclamation just today announced they're getting 0%. So, this myth about we're overemphasized on the urban side and just conserving on that side and somehow just oblivious to the rest of the system and how we respond to drought, is a bit of an affront. So when it comes to drinking water operator certifications, we really need to be focused on workforce development as part of how we are really continuing to support our systems and bring into service the next generation of public servants. And I spoke earlier to the discourse sometimes that's out there, and the challenge that brings to, I think, our decision making. And I think that public service, and especially public service in the water sector, is something that we really need to be bringing folks in to feel excited about, to feel connected to the huge challenges, again, that I think we're all very aware of: the aging infrastructure, the climate change, the things that we all collectively have really been incredible, the leadership in California to make investments around, and to sort of show a model for how we adapt to climate change. But we're not going to be able to do that if we don't have the workforce to actually operate the systems. The dollars that are now flowing to our systems through federal and state investment, that's as well folks in the workforce that we need to be ensuring that are there to complete the work. The amount of retirements that we're going to see in the next 10 years are incredible. And I just look at our numbers at the board, and I know they're reflective of very similar across the water sector, and we're either making this a welcoming place that people want to come and contribute to and be part of and demonstrate leadership, or we're doing ourselves a disservice and instead, finding ourselves, not supporting that. And so the drinking water operator certification program is incredibly important, and sometimes under, really acknowledged at the board, and we need to continue to resource it better. It's really under-resourced. Like so many of our programs, it's fee-based, so it's us coming to you all hat in hand, asking for, increases in fees to support this sort of work. But, the trust has to be there, and I know, the yearly fee discussion we have, not just with water agencies, but agricultural, the agricultural sector, our communities there, and our farmers. It's very hard to have to kind of come hat in hand, and we're a fee-based organization that way after nearly a decade now, where before we were, I think, two-thirds general fund supported, one fund fees. Now we're two-thirds fees, one fund general or so. And so we need to resource those programs to be better at them. But I will say, under our own, we did go digital on testing. We had to. That was regrettably a little too like hook or crook because of COVID. But it was good that we were able to go by computer-based testing to now really be able to provide more of a rolling basis for drinking water and wastewater operators, certifiers, to get certified, to advance as well. That's important. And before, folks were having to wait, I think, 6 months between our testing. So, there's a couple of things we've done to improve, and we need to do a lot more because, again, that workforce development component of what we do is, again, amongst all the tensions, and glad to honestly be able to dialogue around it truly, because I think we want to continue to make sure that publicly we're communicating how welcoming the water community is, how we're continuing to want to draw folks in around the critical work that needs to get done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Young lady.
I don't really need a microphone, but okay. So my question to you is, it ties back into the message that you're talking about with trust and communication, and the idea that, we need to build this trust and create this credibility. And with all the misinformation that, some of the NGOs are putting out, some of the different, conservation groups, they think it's, and the ends justify the means. How is the State Water Resources Control Board helping water districts everywhere to really ensure that the public is both informed with the correct information before they start making judgment calls, and also the legislators, so that they're making informed decisions? What are you guys doing for that?
We're doing our best. I will say, unfortunately, we have, I think, 5 people in our kind of communications kind of wing. So, and we have, such incredible large regulatory programs, funding, and all this. It becomes, it's a lot for them. But we, it is. I will say that where it is most sort of illustrative is just at least in our processes. When it comes to developing, any of the standards or any of the decisions that the board is engaged in, I try to ensure, and it's very important to me, that we have just open and transparent processes that allow everyone to know where the discussion is, how to contribute, and then collectively make sure that we're balancing what are a lot of considerations out there and trying to filter out as best we can what is propaganda noise or talking points that get reiterated and that don't seem to penetrate with facts or some other information. And so I think for me, that's where I can myself at least do the most personally is to make sure that what I'm emphasizing is a culture and a space of openness and transparency, gotcha, around how we develop or make our decisions ultimately, because it's really important to me that there be that trust and that ability to know that there is a fair shake. There isn't just some backroom deal that kind of cooked up the decision and then brought before the board, but there is real meaningful input and approach, and that we're explaining our decision making to you, that we're as I say in our meetings showing our homework, because that's again, that's I think what I can do best, and then otherwise trying to make sure our website is better at communicating things, so you guys can, easily be able to engage, which just seems so, boring. But I think, for me, we don't have a content management system on the back end. It's literally a team of 5 people that manually code all the updates you see on that site. So, Brandon, you and your team are amazing. Thank you so much for what you do. So.
Good evening. My name is Kevin Kenley. I'm on the board of directors for Cucamonga Valley Water District out in the Inland Empire. Thank you for all of your information and being willing to provide the answers to the questions and feedback. There's been a lot of talk about supply management and the aging infrastructure, and one that we haven't kind of discussed that has a huge impact down here is the Delta, because that's a big source for our imported water. So I kind of wanted to mention the C word that we haven't heard tonight is the conveyance, the Delta conveyance tunnels. And I know that was changed to one tunnel about 3 years ago, and from what I understand with the work on that, the EIR on that is supposed to come out a few months from now, sometime about mid of this year, it's expected, I think.
Okay.
And my question is, what do you see the board's priority for that and the timeline for possibly moving forward to implement it and get it, functional?
Thanks. I don't have to run out with like my hands on my ears now that you mentioned the Delta and conveyance, like I had to before the previous application was withdrawn. So I'll take the opportunity, and I appreciate, and was surprised actually the Delta didn't necessarily come up. So thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to respond to that. So the board, so one, as we know, I think everyone in the room knows, the Department of Water Resources is a project proponent, and so they're kind of driving what are ultimately timelines around when an application is submitted. Once that's submitted to the board, the walls go up, and again, we kind of go into our space. And I think for me, in this space, it's important just to say that, it's not just a conveyance project that the board will ultimately have to kind of decide on. It isn't just sites out there that's floating that the board may have to decide on in the water rights space. It's not just the updated standards from the Water Quality Control Board, or the Water Quality Plan for the Bay Delta that needs to be updated that the board will decide on. For me, it's like, truly, how do we make sure that the decision-making for the board in that space is one that's manageable, and that across those decisions we have some consistency, and importantly, provide a basis for just good consideration at the board. And I think that is what will drive timelines. I can't make a prediction on we haven't seen an application, and I wouldn't constrain or otherwise want to say anything because unsure. I think there's a lot of uncertainties there, and I think I mentioned those other projects because all of those unto themselves could be years long decision making before the board. And so for me, it's continuing to make sure that as a basis of each of those decisions, that there is some consistency, and that we have an ability to be able to be better decision makers, quicker but still thorough decision makers in that space. And I think that what it'll require is, what's floating out there, as I talk about the Water Quality Control Plan update, as well our voluntary agreements that are part of this system that, is incredibly complex in the Delta, and the tributaries and the watersheds to feed it. And I think that, the ability to make decisions on projects, like a conveyance project or a sites project or all of those will really depend upon our ability all to be able to see the forest for the trees. And so, that's at least what I'm sort of most emphasizing, and sort of what my decision is there. So the timelines, like how long it will take once it's and when that will be. Yeah, that's the first time I've heard that date. I appreciate that. Will I think be driven, by those abilities and the resources to go through all that decision making. And I think, going back to, the board and the 50-year history and what we're, trying to do here, especially on water rights, it's not difficult to untangle. And I think that, we're really needing to, because otherwise we don't get groundwater recharge in the Central Valley. We don't have, if we don't get some certainty around the way we administer water rights and the way that we view some of that decision-making space, which is intricately tied to the water quality standards, and then ultimately what are the actual projects that are out there, I think are going to be important.
We do want to thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, would you join me in giving him a hand?
Thank you.